Good evening, everybody. My name's Ian Shepard, and I'm the owner of Right Start Newcomer Services. So thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to our weekly Settle in Canada live stream. So tonight's show is called We Live in Mi'kma'ki, a discussion about the Mi'kmaq people. And tonight's special guest is Amy Grant, and I will introduce her in a moment. But first, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Right Start Newcomer Services conducts business in Chibuktuk, which is how you say Halifax in the Mi'kmaq language. This city is part of the unceded territory of, part of the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This means that when settlers came, the Indigenous people did not surrender their territory and instead signed treaties with Europeans. As a business, we're committed to upholding these treaties as we continue to build relationships between settlers, newcomers, and Mi'kmaq people. So tonight we have our special guest, Amy Grant. Amy is a Linu, or Mi'kmaq educator, conversation starter, and community builder who lives and works in Chibuktuk, Mi'kma'ki. She owns Kitpu Consulting, where she conducts workshops on reconciliation and inclusion. As a graduate student at Mount St. Vincent University, her thesis research focuses on news representations of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples. So I'm going to welcome Amy onto the live stream now. Hello, Amy. How are you tonight?
G'day, everyone. Hello. I'm wonderful. Thank you for asking. As Ian said, so G'day, Deluisi, Amy, Nina Ilnu. What I said was, hello, my name is Amy and I am Mi'kmaq. As Ian mentioned, we are in Mi'kma'ki, and I believe if you could make my slides available there for me, Ian.
Sure.
Walalin, as we say. That's how we say thank you.
Walalin.
Walalin, yes, yeah.
Great.
So, tonight we're having a discussion about Mi'kma'ki, which is the traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So, as Ian said, the place name for the city is Chibuktuk, which is Halifax. It means Great Harbor in our language. It's part of Sabaganagade, which is a mouthful. It means Shubenacadie in English, which is a district of the larger territory of Mi'kma'ki. And I believe Ian mentioned this in your land acknowledgement as well. We are governed traditionally by the treaties of peace and friendship, which were signed between 1725 and 52 were the major ones. They went into the 1760s as well, between the Mi'kmaq leaders and the British Crown. I will also touch on this a little later in this presentation as well. And part of what's so important about being welcome to Mi'kma'ki is understanding that we are treaty people. And being treaty people, we must respect and honor all of our rights as such, which I will touch on again later. We have a saying in Mi'kmaq, Msit Nokma, written there below, which means all my relations. And so when we give these land acknowledgements, when Ian does his for Right Start, when I acknowledge the land that we are on here in Mi'kma'ki, it is an acknowledgement. People tend to think it is an acknowledgement that we own. We were the first owners of the land. We don't believe in that concept, however. Ownership is a colonial concept. What we are acknowledging when we acknowledge a land acknowledgement is that we, the Ilnu, which is how you say Mi'kmaq person, we, the Ilnu, honor the land. We have honored the land for thousands of years, and I'll touch on that again later when I come to the history of Mi'kma'ki. We have spent thousands of years, our ancestors, caring for the land and giving back to Mother Earth. So it is an acknowledgement that we were the first people here and that we are being respected for caring for that land. So in order to understand Indigenous peoples and our history, it's important to know where we come from. And to know where we come from, we need to kind of hop back and forth, I guess you could say, between yesterday and today. So most people see Canada, what Canada is currently, this massive plot of land, this huge, spacious country that is made up of 10 provinces and 3 territories by man made borders. And this is what those who have colonized the land have called the places that we currently live in. So right now we live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. That the province is Nova Scotia on the east coast, and Halifax is the name that settlers gave the town, gave the city. And borders have been in existence since the creation of tribal nations. But the thing is these borders that we have currently, these cut across the many Indigenous nations in what is now called the country of Canada. And so, in understanding our history and what land acknowledgements mean, what our relationship is to the land, we have to understand what the land looked like before colonization and before the borders were the borders that we know today, the provinces and territories that we know today were created. It's important to acknowledge these nations that have existed for thousands of years. And as we mentioned, this includes Mi'kmaq. So Mi'kmaq is the land of the Mi'kmaq people. An example I like to use is England is the land of the English people in the UK. And you could say that for many other countries as well. The land is often named for the people, or the people are named for the land. And Mi'kmaq has been around, as I've mentioned, for thousands of years. It's debated to be around 11 to 13,000 years. When the earth was a lot closer together, when we were not separated by so much water, and during the time of the Ice Age, there was a lot of migration from like Mongolian areas, and a lot of what now makes up Siberia and most Asian countries. We traveled across and ended up in the North Americas, and the Mi'kmaq people have been here for around 11 to 13,000 years. We were also a nomadic people, so we traveled inland and outland depending on the seasons. So during the summer, towards the water to fish, inland to hunt during the fall, and in the winter for better shelter. And it can be difficult to name a lot of these places within what is now Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, parts of Quebec, more eastern parts of Quebec, as you can see here, and Newfoundland, which is actually where me and my people are from. And the Beothuk, as we can see in right here, were the traditional people of what is now Newfoundland. But the Mi'kmaq have also been traveling to Oktagamguk, which is what we call this island in Mi'kmaq, for hundreds of years. Even I believe it's 100 to 150 years before first contact, before European settlers ended up in Oktagamguk. So part of our Mi'kmaq history as well is to understand, as I mentioned before in the land acknowledgement, the concept of ownership is not something that we believe in. We are carers of the land. We took care of this territory. What we took for food and shelter, we always gave something back. A lot of times that would be in an offering of tobacco. So we put that sacred medicine, that's one of our sacred medicines, into a pouch, or we just give it freely back to the earth. We give thanks. We give, I guess you would call it a prayer. Prayer is not really a Mi'kmaq word. It doesn't exist. There is no real translation, but what we call it in a lot of spirituality and a lot of religious practices is a prayer. So we give thanks to the Creator. It's also important when we look at our Mi'kmaq history to understand, like I mentioned before with the big map, that there are different nations all across what is now Canada. Each of our customs is unique to our individual nations. So what we do here in Mi'kmaq is going to be different than what people in, say, for example, out in Ontario, there are multiple different tribes, multiple different nations. Their customs and their traditions are going to be a lot different than how we do things. There are similarities. However, pan-indigenizing is a term I will define in the next slide or so. It is pan-indigenizing, assuming that we are all the same, that all Indigenous peoples within the colonial country of Canada are the same and have the same customs. We are governed by hereditary chiefs. So I believe this is one of our chiefs from quite some time ago. But yeah, the way that we do things in Mi'kmaq is different, is unique to us and to our people. So we are also, as is mentioned in our land acknowledgements, we are governed by the treaties of peace and friendship. And what this means is that it is a legal document. When people mention this in land acknowledgements, it's a legal document that is signed by both sides. So the traditional people, the Mi'kmaq people, the leaders, are hereditary chiefs, and the crown, the king or queen of England. It was the king of England at the time that this was signed. And what this proclamation, what this document tells us, what we agreed on, is that we are all treaty people. When we say that, that means, that is outlined in this document, that everyone who comes here and the traditional inhabitants of the land all have an equal right to the resources that this land gives to live plentiful lives. So it's very important to understand where you are within Canada. If you're on the East Coast, if you're in central Canada, if you're out west, if you're in the Northern Territories, what are now called the Northern Territories, it's important to understand where you are and what the traditional territory is where you're living. A lot of people who come to Canada, who immigrate to Canada, are often given documents such as this one. So the Discover Canada Study Guide that tells you about the history of Canada. I believe it gives, and Ian, perhaps you can correct me after I'm done if I'm wrong here, but I believe it gives you like a start for what to learn to study for the citizenship test, I believe. Did you want to pipe in and correct me there?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So this is the study guide that, new immigrants are given, when they are preparing for their citizenship test. But, that doesn't take place until usually 4 years or so after arrival in Canada. So they may see this upon arrival, or they may not see this for a period of time until they are ready to study for their citizenship test.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And so within this document, within the documents that you're given, is a summary of the history of Canada. It includes, as you can see here, a page on Aboriginal peoples. It uses the term Aboriginal, which is outdated. We use Indigenous now, or First Nations. And it has a short description and a few photos of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And it's interesting because this is the same type of information that I was given when I was going to school here. We're often taught this history, and immigrants learning about Canada are taught this history from a European focus, from a colonial point of view. And when the Indigenous um, history is included, there are often incorrect assumptions that all of the relationships between the Indigenous people and the settlers or colonists was peaceful, which is often incorrect. And that whole history can be difficult to talk about, and it is a completely other conversation that I could talk probably for up to an hour or more about on its own. Um, the information in these documents is very short. It has little detail. As I had mentioned, using out of date titles, a lack of consultation with Indigenous communities, and the term I mentioned before, pan-indigenizing. It often pan-indigenizes First Nations people. And the concept of Indigenous Canadians is kind of a funny concept because Canada is a bringing together of all of that different land that is the traditional territory of multiple First Nations groups. So Canada as an entity is an entity that settlers or colonists created. So to say Indigenous Canadians is an incorrect term. And that's where pan-indigenizing comes. It's the assumption that all Indigenous peoples within this country are the same. As I mentioned before, and I'll touch on this again briefly, our traditions, the way that we smudge, this is a sacred ceremony where we smudge sacred herbs it's a cleansing ritual. The way that we drum, the way that we dance and hold ceremony, the way that we elect our representatives, and how our different communities are governed is different depending on what traditional territory you're living on, what nation had traditionally governed that area. The way that we do things is there are similarities, like I mentioned, between these nations. We all, for the most part, smudge and drum and dance. But the way that we do those things and the way that we go about passing on that knowledge traditionally is different. And it's very, very important, no matter where you live currently within Canada, or if you're planning to come here to Canada, to understand where you are, what traditional territory you are on. So when we talk about pan-indigenizing and indigeneity, what it means, why is this so important? I often try to relate it to, you know, to everybody, so that there is a understanding of what indigeneity means. Indigenous, to be indigenous to a place, means that you are a people who are the original or earliest known inhabitants of the region, or are the descendants of the original inhabitants. You are originating in or native to, or the first peoples of that area. And this is, while often debated, not just applied to North America, as to what is now Canada, the United States, Australia, the South Americas, when we talk about indigeneity. What I want people to understand when it comes to this is that your indigeneity, everyone has it. We are all indigenous to somewhere. Indigeneity is tied to your traditional land. you have to ask yourself, where are your ancestors from? Where is your traditional land? Um, Depending on your family history, wherever you or your ancestors might be from, that is your traditional land. So that place or those places are your indigeneity. And a lot of people, like myself, come from mixed indigeneities as well, mixed indigenous backgrounds. I am indigenous to this traditional land, which I currently live, but I also have ancestors who come from different parts of Europe. And like I said, while debated um, on this topic, the whole concept of Europeans being indigenous to a place, I understand how some people might feel about that. However, the way I see it, on a level of understanding the concept of indigeneity, is that my European ancestors, before coming here, even if they were colonizing this land here, my Irish ancestors of Newfoundland, of Ukdagamguk, are indigenous to Ireland, to Eire, is how you say that in Gaelic, in Irish Gaelic. Some of my German ancestors, they are indigenous to Germany, to that traditional land. Um, so it's very important too, and I encourage people in acknowledging and understanding this often untold history of Indigenous peoples in the North Americas, in what is now Canada, in the United States, um, and for myself and people coming here to this traditional land, to my land, to Mi'kma'ki. That journey of understanding your own indigeneity can help you understand what it means to be Indigenous on this land. So, oh yes, and I brought up the map again just to help people understand. Yeah, like I said, if you're already here, try to make an effort to make connections where you are. Um, what part of this land, of what we now call Canada, are you living in? Are you here on the East Coast, or have you moved somewhere else within what is now Canada? There are so many different nations within this territory on this land. So I encourage you to make those connections. And if you're planning to come here, if you're planning to come to this country, know your surroundings, as I've said. Um, Learn the history, not that just that you are told to learn to pass the test, but I encourage you to learn beyond um, the European or colonial way of knowing the history of this land. And I said Wellalin to Ian earlier, um, but the plural version of that is Wallaliok, which means thank you. So this is a very big conversation. And, I squeezed as much as I could into this 25-minute piece, or 20 minutes, however long I was talking for. Um, it's a conversation that we could have for hours. There's so much information to know. There's so much to learn. I scraped the top layer of all of this history. Um, we could talk for hours just about Mi'kma'ki. We could talk for hours just about Ukdagamguk, the land that I come from. So I encourage you, if anyone has any questions, to please let me know, or you can reach out afterwards. Pretty available, I would say, to answer any questions. I guess I will hand it back over to you, Ian.
Okay. Well, Alan, Amy, thank you so much for your presentation. And it was really great. I like how slowly you spoke and clearly you spoke, and how you explained everything simply. So yeah, I thought it was a great presentation.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's a challenge for me, because where I am from, Ukdagamguk, well, I'm from, we call it Newfoundland, and I mean, if anyone's ever been there, We have quite an interesting accent. I moved here when I was 3, so I don't have one. But yeah, I have a very quick speech pattern, and I surprised myself with how slowly I was talking.
Yeah, I think we spoke about that beforehand about slowing down and speaking clearly. So thank you for remembering to do so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I will encourage you, if you're tuning in, please ask any questions or make any comments. If you just want to say hi, you can do that too. So we'll open it up to questions and answers. But yeah, I just have a couple questions that I thought of while you were delivering the presentation, Amy. So you encourage people to learn more about, maybe the First Nation group where they're living. What are some ways that we can do that? So are there websites we can visit, or museums, or books, or what would you recommend?
Yeah. It's hard during the pandemic because my normal answer would be go out into those communities and talk to the people. Normally outside of pandemic times, there's a huge powwow for Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st, which is summer solstice. So it's the longest day of the year. And there's usually a powwow in, why can't I remember the names of things right now? The Commons,
Right.
the big park in like the middle of the city where the skating rink and stuff is.
Mhm.
There's usually a big powwow there. Go um, attend and learn about it. There's all kinds of training programs. The Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center is downtown on Gottingen Street. Of course, this is another thing where it's like outside of pandemic times. But if you follow people like that on social media, I know the Friendship Center is on Facebook mostly. I don't know if they're on Instagram. Um, there's a lot of really great influencers to follow on Instagram. You can talk to me. I grew up white passing. That is a completely other conversation too that people can have with me if they want. But I've been discovering for the past almost decade now my background and my history and stuff. So it's been a journey for me, and I'm quite new to it. But what I've learned in the past almost 10 years is um, I'm more than willing to share that with people and to remind people that it's not closed off. Different communities might be different, but here in Mi'kma'ki, here on Mi'kmaq traditional land with our people, with the Ilnu, we want you there. We want you to come to these things. We want you to ask questions. And it's never bad if it's out of a good place. If you're coming from a place of curiosity, I personally, if you're talking to me, I'm not going to shoot you down or dismiss you. I welcome questions. If anyone has anything that they want to ask, let's talk. Let's have a Zoom chat, or maybe grab a coffee when the restrictions lift.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah, thanks. There's the term now, reconciliation. So what does that mean? Because this is everywhere once you start to look into the issue. So can you just briefly talk a little bit about what reconciliation is?
Good question. And I feel like I should have put something in my presentation about that, but reconciliation is tricky. Canadian reconciliation is it's an oxymoron. It's two things that do not go together. So, as I mentioned earlier, Canada is a colonial entity. So, to try to reconcile those relationships with Indigenous people is the approach, the concept, I guess, is coming from a good place in a way, but the way it's happening, the way it's being initiated is not the best way to approach it. What we need here in Mi'kma'ki, the issues with that we had with the fishery back in the fall, the claims over the treaty rights. Those are not the same issues that nations are going to have out in the Mohawk Nation in Ganawage in near Montreal, the Wet'suwet'en Nation out in what is now British Columbia. Their needs are different. All of our needs are different. Even within a nation, even within Mi'kma'ki, the needs here are different than my traditional territory in Uktagangook. So reconciliation, for me, it needs to be approached with the communities where you're living, not Canadian reconciliation. It is a huge project that, as a whole, is not meeting the needs of all Indigenous peoples. So reconciliation here is reconciliation with the Mi'kmaq Nation.
Right. Okay.
Did
Yeah,
that answer
that
your
makes sense
question?
to me. Yeah.
Okay.
It just made me think about it. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. So could it be more like instead of Canadian reconciliation, is it provincial, or I don't know. I mean, would
It's
that make more sense?
to an extent, yes, but
Mhm.
here, Mi'kma'ki is the southwest coast of what is now the province of Newfoundland, PEI, no, all of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, New Brunswick, part of Quebec.
Mhm.
In Ontario, there are many different nations. In Quebec, in BC, there's probably a dozen different nations there. Um, that's a challenging question, one that I don't know if I have the answer to. It's something that maybe the elders might have an answer to. It could be a start to make reconciliation a provincial thing. When it comes to, I guess you're asking a government body being involved, right?
Mhm.
Right. That's very tricky
Mhm.
because of the way that traditional tribal nations were bordered and governed. So I don't even know if I have an answer to that. And the answer I would give wouldn't fit to everyone's needs either. Maybe provincial works here in the Mi'kmaq territory in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton, but it might not work out west. So
Mhm.
it's talking with the communities and asking them what they need. Would provincial work with you? How do we do this? How do we approach this?
Okay, great. What could an individual do, such as myself, right? Because I carry some guilt that I was born as a white settler, and I do have some guilt that I have advantages. I have had a lot of privilege and advantages in my life because of that. So, as an individual, how can I work towards reconciliation? Should I go to the communities and talk to them and ask them what help I could provide?
You're hitting me with all the hard ones
I'm
tonight,
sorry.
Ian. No, no need to apologize. I appreciate the curiosity.
Yeah.
Um, I'm in a corner, but I'm in a good corner, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Um, that is such a tricky question. It's a lot of people will say, show up and ask these questions. I mean, that's the first step. Um, like I mentioned in the presentation, learn about these places beyond what we're taught. I mean, I think back to what I was taught in school, and I think we got like a page in our Canadian history book, if that. Um, and it's unfortunate that we don't learn those things in our school systems here, or for the citizenship test, or anything like that. It does take time. It will change over time. But yeah, it's really important to like do the research yourself, learn about it, show up to events, support people when and where they need the support. Um, Obviously, this is easier to do outside of the pandemic, but when protests are happening, show support in some way. It doesn't always have to be boots on the ground either. That's what a lot of people think. You all have to show up and go downtown and picket. That's great for quite a few people, but not for everybody. your allyship, your support can come down sometimes to correcting your great aunt at the dinner table, um, it, learning what you've learned and teaching some of your family members or your spouse or your children a lot of the untold history. It it's not as complex or complicated as it might feel, or it might seem like this huge undertaking. But yeah, sometimes it just comes down to very simple things. Every little thing is a step, and there's no need to feel guilty. The ones who feel guilty are often not the ones at fault and not the ones who need to feel guilty.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that answer, Amy. I just want to bring up a couple comments that we have from our viewers. So Jalile says, hi, thanks for the presentation. So thank you, Amy, from Jalile.
Hello.
And she has a comment here. So if Ian can arrange for a tour to visit places like that, we can all go together. So that's a nice suggestion, Jalile. So yeah, maybe I'll talk to Amy afterwards, and she can help us to think of a tour itinerary or something that, it would be nice to visit or have some type of program like this for newcomers. And I think iSANS has done some things where they would bring a group of clients to the Native Friendship Center. But yeah, it would be nice if everybody could sort of experience something like that.
Something that you could do is if you reached out to the elders, the water walkers from Sabaganagadik or Shubenacadie River up at the Treaty Truck House. It's only 40 minutes, I think, 45 minutes away. It's a lot, it's one of the closest communities to the city, and it's less of a drive. It's less of a trip to go down there. They always need, outside of restrictions, obviously, when restrictions lift, people to go and help out. You can, um, a Treaty Truck House is like a little, kind of like a shed or like a shack, and it's where people gather. Um, Alton gas is an issue there right now. They're basically trying to, large companies are trying to destroy the river. And so the water walkers, the protectors, and the elders are there, basically saying, we're here, we're not moving, and we're here to protect the land. They need people to help out every once in a while to um, help fix up the shed for the winter, the truck house for the winter. They have ceremonies there quite often. I'm sure they wouldn't mind even if you just reached out and asked if you could bring up some newcomers, just to learn, talk to elders, learn about the culture, um, and hang out with people, even if they're not doing a lot of like hard labor or anything like that. Yeah, and that too, like the Alton gas issue is, that's the easiest way I could put it without talking for a
Yeah.
very long time about it. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great. That's a great suggestion. So thank you, Amy, and thank you, Jalile, for your suggestion. That's great. So we only have about 5 minutes left or so. So if anybody else has any questions or comments, feel free to add those in the comment section. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about your business, Amy. So I know your business name is called Kitpu Consulting. Maybe what does that mean, and what type of work do you do?
Of course, yeah. I have to correct your pronunciation.
Okay, sure. Of
No,
course.
it's fine. It's fine. It's one of those languages where like the K makes a G sound. It's not the way that it's spelled. So it's Gitbu. So kind of like saying it as if it was spelled Gidboo. Gitbu.
Kitpu.
Gitbu
Okay.
in Mi'kmaq, it means eagle. And the eagle is the messenger between the people and the creator. In our spirituality, we do believe in a divine being and a creator who created the earth. Um, and they are the messenger between us people and creator and us people. They're the animal that flies the highest in the sky, um, and that's how they are the creator. So like eagle feathers, for example, are very sacred. And yeah, with my business, because of the sacredness of the animal of the Kitpu, and what I do and what I teach, I conduct workshops for business needs. So oftentimes that's talking about traditional Mi'kmaq teachings, um, trying to help people incorporate true reconciliation into their mandates, into their organizational structure, working on diversity, inclusion, equity, and sometimes just teaching things like this about the history of Mi'kma'ki, and the history of our people and our customs. So it's all about education, and helping people to better understand and to make those connections between us and them.
That's great. It's a much needed business, and I wish you the best of luck with your business. I know Amy and I met probably about a year ago. We were both doing the same entrepreneurship training courses, so we're both sort of getting started around the same time. And yes, I wish you the best, Amy, and I know it's going to be successful. So
Oh yeah, I was just thank you. I was just looking at the day. It was like exactly a year ago, I think.
was it
Um,
okay?
you were yeah, June cohort, right? We were in the same
Yeah,
cohort.
yeah.
Yeah, we started like exactly a year ago.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
right? Time flies.
yeah. Yeah, and here's Amy's website. So Gitbu, is that better pronunciation?
Yes, Kitpu.
www.gitbu.ca. And you can find Amy's contact info. So if you do have any questions, or like she said, if you want to go out for a coffee, maybe when some restrictions are lifted, Amy would be up for that. So you can reach out to her through her website. Yeah, so time is almost up. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Amy, or anything else you'd like to explain?
Yeah, well, just about reaching out, I guess. I know I used to be a nervous wreck when it came to, when I was first getting into the professional world, reaching out to people, asking questions. And like I said before, if you're coming from a good place, you're doing the right thing, right? So that's why I always say, uh, reach out to me. We can talk, we can chat. I'd rather you reach out to me and get your questions answered, than not know and make assumptions or be, um, I guess, afraid to reach out to people within the community. Maybe talking to me will make it easier for you to go down to the Friendship Center or go to a powwow or something along those lines. And there are no wrong or bad questions, even in the way you word them. I know your intent, I know where you're coming from. So, um, no need to worry about that. I'm generally very easygoing with those things. So yeah, please reach out. The education is so important, and it's so important to make those connections. And I look forward to getting those connections. Hopefully, yeah. I believe you've given people my email, and you can also find me on LinkedIn as well if you wanted to reach out to me there.
Mhm. I don't know if I did give your email. I just gave your
Oh,
website.
it's easy. So the website is gitbu.ca,
Mhm.
and my email is amy@gitbu.ca.
Okay, so I'll just put that up on the bottom of the screen before we go. So is that right? Okay, so feel free to send Amy an email. She's wonderful. She's very kind. She will not bite your head off if you ask a silly question like I did.
No silly
So
question.
there are no silly questions.
Yeah.
Great. That's what I like to say to my students too. So
Hmm.
okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Walal and Amy, thank you so much. And
Well,
thank
Lynn.
you to all of our viewers. We do have one more comment that I'd like to share with you. So Liz says, thank you, Amy. I learned a lot today.
Oh,
So yeah.
wonderful. Well, Lolland, thank you, Ian. Well, Laliok, for everybody listening, thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I look forward to making some new connections, hopefully.
Great. You're very welcome, and have a great evening, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the beautiful day, and we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye.